got to talk about the Revelry, and we got to talk about the PlayStation 5.
Oh, right.
Oh, yeah.
Let's go PS5 first.
All right, PS5 first. I got one right behind me. I don't know if you guys can see that.
Beautiful.
Totally
What'd that run you?
Zoom in.
How'd you get that? Legit. Looks great.
That's a black square with an S on it. I don't know what that is, but
That's it.
No,
or it's a 5. Oh, it's the 5.
It's a 5.
It's a bold
Oh, it's a
move by
5. I
Sony.
get it.
Dev
I really want to get the branding right on this.
Did you really make that just for that joke?
Well, yes,
He's
but the joke
dedicated.
was made for a YouTube video.
Oh, okay.
It was the thumbnail for a YouTube video.
Because I was like, that's set up for waiting for an hour into the show to make that joke. Like, wow, you're a patient man.
So, Wired.com had an article this week where they interviewed Mark Cerny about the PlayStation 5. And while Sony and Mark Cerny didn't want to call it the PlayStation 5, they want to call it the next generation Sony console. You know, I think for the purposes of this discussion, we could call it the PlayStation 5 because it's the next Sony console. There's a lot of really cool hardware specs and features announced by Sony in this interview. The processor is going to be a Ryzen Zen 2 architecture, 8-core processor. They're going to use the Navi architecture for the graphics card, which, if you're not following like PC gaming too much, what that means is it's very high-end. It's a very high-end processor and graphics card that isn't even released yet, right? Both of these things are expected to come out for PCs this summer. So, you know, pretty high-end stuff that's not even available yet. They also said that it's going to feature ray tracing and a SSD that's faster than anything that's available for the PC market at this point, which is pretty crazy.
How about the resolution?
Up to 8K.
That's just output.
That's what everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, like I would expect maybe like Sony's next video service will
Be an
output
8K.
8K. But like
They're
gaming,
just
I would
future proof.
8K.
Yeah,
ray
yeah.
tracing.
Well, that was one of the problems with the PlayStation 4, I thought, at launch, was that it didn't support 4K.
Yeah, but it takes time. But the one thing
Right.
they didn't mention, unfortunately, was any discussion of if they want to, you know, make sure games run at 60 or 120
Yeah.
or whatever.
right?
Forget
I think
about
that's up to
that.
the developer, just like it is now, right? It's like if the developer wants to take advantage of ray tracing, then I would expect to see 30 FPS kind of max.
Ugh.
But if they,
I hope not.
So
I would imagine
things that I'm very happy
the
about.
highest end PC hardware.
The things that I'm very, very happy about to hear is that they're embracing like modern PC architecture and technology. Like it doesn't sound like they're going with second or third or 2 or 3 years ago type of architecture. Sounds like they're trying to adopt modern current stuff right now, so they don't hopefully have these issues
Get dated.
Yeah, where it's like you have these hot new games come out and they're just struggling to maintain 30 FPS because that just sucks, you know?
Yeah. Well, with the 8-core Ryzen processor, right? This thing is a lot of PC gamers are looking at this coming out this summer thing, and this is finally going to be the point where AMD catches up to Intel as far as like clock speeds go, and you know, specifically when we talk clock speeds in PC gaming, we're talking about FPS, right? Is the higher the clock speed goes on your processor, the faster your FPS can go. And that's been one of the downfalls for the previous generation of consoles, right? Is that they had really powerful graphics, but the processor was kind of letting them down, so you weren't getting high frame rates. You're getting really beautiful 4K graphics at 30 FPS.
Yeah, that's some of it. I mean, the people always over maximize and, you know, use too much, and they overdo it. That 30 it was acceptable. I feel like when, you know, it was launching with consoles and stuff. But I was surprised as we hit into Destiny 2. Right, I was like, oh man, we're still we didn't make it to 60. I just think it's a huge, like, I guess we're dealing with it, and I know it's not like it's not terrible. It's just once you go 60, you're like, shooters should be at 60. I mean, it's almost no contest at this point. So
8K 30 FPS sounds like having a really beautiful
even 4K
car that goes like 20 miles an hour.
Exactly. Surface
Like
straight.
Lamborghini Countach.
Yeah.
nobody needs that. But
Just saying.
It's an
you got to remember this will
traveler.
be.
Don't take it on the freeway ever.
you got
You got to remember it might potentially be coming
take it
out,
around
you know.
town.
next year. So Navi architecture is planned for this year, but it's also the architecture. And I read a little bit, and it's, you never really know, but sure, it might feature some of the ray tracing. I read some stuff sort of saying it might be a little closer to what the 1080 is, quote unquote, but with some of these newer features. Now, if you're looking at power, but 1080 is quite powerful. And again, as you pointed out, you're offloading a lot these days, physics, so stuff that CPU used to do. So now you also have the 8-core CPU on top of it. So I mean, that when you think about selling a $400 or $500 machine next year or whatever, maybe early March 21, that's still a lot. And that's why just the 8K thing is silly.
You think it's going to be $400 or $500?
Yeah.
That's a lot of PC power.
I mean, how else? 8-core Ryzen with next gen architecture right now.
SSD that they claim is faster than anything available for SSD PC right now.
That's the real reason, I believe, above all. I mean, that was the big thing that surprised me. Everything else, I was like, yeah, of course you're going to have all these things. But wait. SSD is super important to them.
They've gotten so much cheaper in the past year.
Yeah. But they're still
I feel like they're
expensive.
table stakes. I feel like they're table stakes at this point. Like
a 1 terabyte SSD, what is averaging 100, 125, I think, if I'm seeing it.
Yeah, a year ago, I think it was 250.
Yeah, it's come down, and you're right. By next year, maybe it's 60 but that's, when you get inside consoles, they need to make a margin on this stuff. But anyway,
that's the thing. I wonder if they're actually going to, 400 to 500. It sounds like a deep cut. Like they're not going to be making any money on that for a few years.
Oh, you think it's going to be more expensive?
Yeah, I do. I think at least 600.
But they never make money on the console.
See Sony making that mistake again.
Yeah.
Leopard. What do you think, man?
Well, they never make money on the console. It's always an accessory. They always undersell the price of the console just to put it in people's hands, and then they get the accessories, get the games out, and the exclusives out, which is what get people to adopt the console for a cheap price, and then buy the accessories, buy the games, which is what makes their margin.
That's sometimes true, sometimes not. But early on, it's more likely to be true. Later on, they expect to make money on the console too.
But also, PS4 launched with hardware that I think was considered mid-tier PC hardware at the time, right? Wasn't it?
It was not impressive.
The CPU is always trash.
Yeah, it was just it was like the CPU was struggling already at launch.
But not for the
price. The hard drive is disk. I mean, I replaced my hard drive back in 2014 with Destiny and put an SSD in it and loved it for Destiny 1 because the character screen actually came up within 2 seconds versus 4 seconds. Like, how can you not play Destiny 1 on PS4 without an SSD? I don't know.
Yeah. No, totally.
Yeah.
Now that it's standard, it's great.
If they're going to put those specs into a hardware, I just don't know if they're going to be able to get it down to like $500. I'd be surprised.
In my opinion, it's unprecedented that somebody would ever go as high as that these days because competition is way too high. I mean, you got Stadia in the cloud, and they're going to sell you a $70. I know, sell you a $70 controller, but Xbox is going to do their xCloud. They're going to do something, and who knows? They might have. For all we know, the new Xbox One S All Digital Edition might serve as an entry level to new Xbox games in the cloud. But the competition's bigger than ever.
Microsoft's also got something really interesting where they have their kind of game anywhere thing going on, where you buy a game and it's good on, it's good on the Xbox, it's good on the PC. If they move that forward into the next generation Xbox, that means that a lot of your games, even going back to the Xbox 360, are going to be playable on your next generation Xbox, where PlayStation doesn't really have that going on, right? If you have a PlayStation 3 version of, I'm trying to think of a game, Last of Us. Last of Us it's a different version of the PlayStation 3. It's a different version on the PlayStation 4. Is it going to be a different version on the PlayStation 5? Or am I going to be able to play PlayStation 4 games on my PlayStation 5?
Didn't they confirm that?
Are they going to have upgraded graphics like they do on the Xbox One X?
Yeah.
Didn't they confirm
they did say
that
it was backwards compatible?
Yeah.
But that's different
compatible.
Than a
but
new
is it going to be like
running
upgraded?
On, remastered.
Oh, I see.
Like if I buy a game for Xbox, or I'm sorry, for PlayStation 4, right before the PlayStation 5 comes out, am I going to own the PlayStation 5 version of that game, or am I going to own the PlayStation 4 version of that game?
Yeah.
What do you think all this means for Destiny on new generation of consoles? Like, is it leaning towards PS5 or the Stadia? Or
it's going to be
by the way, they said
Sony 1 year exclusive on PS5.
Yeah. Oh God.
I'm totally joking. Please don't grill me.
Way.
Don't.
He's joking.
Don't.
That's right.
light
Did
the
everybody
fire under
see
me.
that during Inside Xbox this week? Phil Spencer confirmed he's testing in Alpha Destiny 2 on the xCloud, which I thought was amazing
Cool.
to hear that they've got the current code working. That they clearly worked with Bungie, in my opinion. I just don't think it's as easy as plugging it in. Maybe Leopard knows more. You were a coder, I believe, right? So I don't know. You know about the server side, but he said he was playing Destiny 2 on the road as well as Crackdown on his phone with the controller on xCloud.
I'll tell you that I'm not a game developer. But, okay, so Stadia was announced from Google. A huge announcement. Today is the first day I've ever heard of xCloud.
Really? Oh, yeah. Check it out. It's funny because they've been they're not treating it as their next generation exactly, but they got out the door and said xCloud is going to be, the Azure.
We also have a
servers in the
Stadia.
cloud. They said it long before, in my opinion. It was like they released a trailer earlier this year, but it seems like forever ago now. I think.
I guess I don't know if it flopped, but I never saw it.
It was all white background and them talking about the future on the Azure server cloud. So it wasn't a sexy Xbox announcement, but if you read between the lines, xCloud was coming, and they said games in the cloud.
But you can't put FPS on clouds. Like it's just not.
The
not
they-
experience.
Stadia showed us Doom, supposedly. You
can't play
don't believe in
PvP on the cloud. I mean,
Leopard, I want to
I'm
hear
with
you say
you.
why though. Like,
Yeah.
Specifically, why?
it's latency. There's
Latency.
so much
So if they
latency,
could
input
solve
delay
the
between when you
latency
move
problem.
your controller stick or move your mouse. I watched the Stadia thing when they had some sort of PvE game up, and you could see the guy. He took the mouse and he went really slowly across the screen with it. And you could still see he moved the mouse, and it you're like, you can't play that
this
game.
is totally playable. Yeah, honest. Yeah,
No,
okay.
it's totally playable. If you play it like grandma, it's totally fine. No, you can't play a high-paced witch shooter with that. There's no way. And so it's great for games that aren't FPS, but I mean that's what my main experience is in. So
If they could fix that one issue, there's nothing else that stands in the way.
if you can
That
fix
one
physics,
major
yeah.
issue. Yeah.
That is a big issue. But if
You
they
can
could
redo the entire
That's doable,
infrastructure
yeah.
of a nation.
all you gotta
right?
do is put servers in everybody's basement, and we're good.
Exactly right.
That's fine.
But
I'm not going to do that.
It's just so everybody understands,
buddy.
right? And I know most gamers do, and it's repeating the obvious at this point. But literally, what happens, right? You press the thumbstick, it sends a signal out over the wire or over Bluetooth, wireless, or whatever it is to your console, which processes it, which sends it out, over the internet. Effectively to YouTube, let's just say that in this case, it sends it to YouTube, and YouTube picks all that up as well as the game information and encodes a frame of video and sends it back to you to look at. That's basically what's going on, right?
Sounds like witchcraft to me.
Latency is so important to gamers too that some people are unhappy with Bluetooth controllers. They prefer them plugged into the console directly.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah,
I
I mean, just your
I've been a
game mode.
stickler
on
for
it.
Play with a
years.
wired controller.
Yeah, I prefer my mouse and keyboard wired.
Well, I mean, it's clear
really
that
do.
people are skeptics of the server stuff, but maybe going back to it, to me, PlayStation 5, really, what I liked about it was that I got the sense that Sony's saying, look, we know everybody's talking Stadia in the cloud, and Nintendo's on the go, and Xbox, sure, but we're also the lead. We've sold a bazillion PS consoles, and we're gonna stick to what I heard was epic cinematic in your living room, high-end graphics in your living room, and we're also going to do the other stuff. But that's why I do envision, Last of Us 2 or Death Stranding and these super high-end games that are in your living room at 4K at 60 frames, hopefully, or even 1080, just an amazing looking. And I'm okay with that. I think that's.
Fran, do you think that's why they're not going to E3 this year? Is because they don't want to? They don't have any games to show off for PS4, and the games that are going to come next are going to be next gen games.
I think it's a combination. I think they don't have as much to show, but I think ultimately, having been to almost, or maybe I've been to 20 E3s now, it's a very expensive show, and it's a strong arm kind of feeling that you got to buy the booth, and it takes a ton of energy. And Nintendo, boy, they really got ahead of the curve and just said, we're just going to do it online on YouTube, and the word has gotten out. Ultimately, I think people have looked at Nintendo Direct and they're like, you know what, this probably makes a lot more sense. And Microsoft's the last one standing. On the opposite side, Microsoft's in a really interesting position, and they said that this week too. We're going to be at E3. We're going to celebrate gaming. We're the only ones there now. So I think that's exciting. They're going to come out swinging and say, we got xCloud, we got Xbox One X2 or whatever. It's going to be interesting to see the Titans clashing in that sense.
So do you think Microsoft announces? Do you think Microsoft announces the Xbox, 4?
Yeah,
at E3.
X2.
Yeah.
Xbox 2? Xbox.
Now they're going all the way to 4.
1.5?
I know. The last one was
Xbox,
all the way to 4.
The 360, the one.
Xbox 361?
The post Xbox.
Maybe it'll be like a Z box or something.
Z box.
Please don't.
Z box.
Z box.
What? It'll be 2 Z's exactly.
Now, what do you guys?
Now, be real.
Are
we talking about this so much because we're too scorned by the pain of the revelry? Is that why we're going so deep into the PlayStation 5 talk?
Well, no, because this is
new announcement.
This is big.
There's nothing to talk about.
This is the future of a lot of games that's going to happen because these consoles set the tone and the possibilities for the.
That is true.
The architecture and the graphics and all that.
I feel like if you're spending this much money, like depending on how much the PlayStation 5 is, wouldn't you just spend the money on a good gaming PC? Like you said, didn't you think it would be like up to like $600, $700?
It's still more convenient though. No. It's still more convenient.
Yeah, it's not just a money thing; it's a convenience thing.
Yeah.
In what way?
Well, because PC
plug
gaming
it into your TV and you play.
Yeah,
you don't have
both
to
talk at the same time. What?
You plug a console into your TV and just start playing. You don't have to worry about
consoles are
viruses.
Easy.
You don't have
PCs
to worry
are hard.
about.
It's true. With PC, you have to set up other stuff too. I guess
PCs have a lot of inconveniences that happen, and if you like tinkering, it makes sense. If you don't like tinkering, console's perfect.
It's easy to us, but it's not easy to most people.
Yeah.
Does anybody actually buy a $700 PC? Honestly.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of people.
Is that in the history of man ever actually happened?
Some people do.
If you have 700
AMD,
for a console,
Radeon,
you could save a few more for a decent game.
That's everybody's budget, but I was like, well, those LED fans look really cool too.
I don't know, Leopard.
I think that market's pretty big, Briar, honestly.
You were saying you think people can do a $700 PC is fine?
I mean, people do with the AMD and Radeon all the time, but that's just not the way I roll. I mean, Intel, NVIDIA all the way. I have a 10 core 6950X for my stream PC with Deca core. I have the 7700K quad core with 1080 Ti, liquid cooling, custom cooling loop on my gaming PC.
How's the RGB?
When you go, what?
How's the RGB?
How's the RGB?
So all of my PCs are stuck in an equipment closet behind the wall there, behind a sliding door. And
are your fans?
This guy is such a professional.
So I keep all the noise and heat in this room, which has an internal vent that circulates through to my split AC unit,
Custom
so everything stays nice and cool.
For the PC exost?
I built it myself because when I built this house, I didn't think it'd get that hot in there, but it's pretty hot in there. So
well, the other thing about this announcement is if you look at the specs of the PlayStation 5, right? You got an 8-core processor, Navi graphics. Does 8-core processor become the baseline? Like, because games are developed with a platform in mind and a baseline, right? This is the lowest targeted graphics we're going to get. Consoles. 8-core processors all of a sudden become the baseline, the minimum recommended. This doesn't just push up where we expect graphics to go on consoles, but also on PC.
Yeah, exactly. It pushes
games to be developed. They talked about Spider-Man and how they had to limit his speed, web slinging through the city based on how fast they could stream data off of the hard drive. And now you've got an SSD that can supply that much faster. He could move as fast as a jet fighter, and you could still see that stuff loaded to that. So this doesn't just affect how good console games are, because any time that game is dual developed for consoles and PC, all of a sudden PC games get better as well.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, especially with multi-platform development, because consoles, frankly, leave you, dragged down a bit. Not that you can't develop for PC, but you're trying to do everything once, and how high do you go here and there? And optimization, you do see the difference with something like God of War comes out. You're like, oh my God, like it looks so amazing. It's not even close to like a 1070 or 1060, or it looks incredible. And so you can see what people can do with optimization. So yeah, I think when you get stuff a lot closer, but that's what happens in the beginning. So late 2020 or 2021, sure. But by then, as Leopard was just saying, it's like he's got a 10 core now. And, next thing you know, a 10 core.
For streaming.
Yes, but my point is that come 2 years from now, that'll be a little more common for people. It'll be because everything's starting to ship with 8
Well,
cores.
you can buy $100, I think $70 right now. You can go to Micro Center and buy an 8-core Ryzen Gen 1 processor for $170. It's
pretty fast.
Taking my limited programming experience and taking that into gaming, I would say that it's to go more than 4-core. It gets pretty complicated to try to multi-thread all these different processes that are happening in game. And so I've always felt like quad-core was kind of the sweet spot. And so
I don't know,
when
man.
you start dumping in 8-core, 10-core
Origins, and everybody's talking about how they're getting like awful frame rates, and I'm running on an 8-core processor. It's Intel, so it's still got the high, clock speed. But I was running an 8-core. I'm like, I'm not having any of these issues.
Yeah, he makes a good point. The optimization is so important, and like we hear it all the time, and even with our OBS and stuff, it's like you might have a 10-core, but how much is taken advantage of? Sometimes you can probably get really high optimization on a 6-core, just as good.
I would just say that I super overclock my quad core, and I have great results. But it all comes down to what the developer focuses on. If they focus on whatever hardware the most people are using for the game, then right now it's quad core, but eventually it could be octa-core, but eventually when you have so many processes multi-threaded like that, it gets so complicated for the developer to try to make it efficient that it almost there's just you lose the diminishing returns of that, because there's just so much work in trying to coordinate all those things at the same time. It gets super difficult. But
basically, there's going to be years before it's properly taken advantage of, and the toolkit is there to properly have 8 cores being efficient.
But if that's what everyone has, then that's what they'll focus on, and I'm sure they'll make a good job of it. But right now, it's definitely quad core.
Right.
For the record, I want to clarify. I wasn't saying like, oh yeah, you could get a great gaming PC with $700. I was just trying to say, because you could spend that much on a lot of other stuff. I'm just saying, if you've saved up that much money already, why not continue?
My first car was
a little further.
Go 1200. Yeah, because 1200.
I'm just saying.
I don't know, man. I mean,
you gone this far, you
Geo Metro.
That's what I'm saying. Because I definitely spent way more money on mine. I'm not trying to like.
No, it's a fair question.
I
think
think the people at home, you can get a great streaming center.
But the real point is, people don't want to. The people that play on their TV and sit on the couch don't want to have to boot a PC up and have a keyboard or whatever. And there's solutions, but it's just a lot.
They want to plug in 2 wires max and call it.
Yeah.
And start playing video games and shoot stuff in the head.
That's the potential appeal of cloud, is that for all that it bothers us, not that I'm saying FPS is in the state it needs to be right now. And I haven't even played a cloud game that works. I mean, it goes all the way back to OnLive and Gaikai, which was bought and turned into PlayStation Now by Sony. It's existed, but the lag input's just not great. But the point is, we're moving towards it. So the potential accessibility of playing, I think of a game like Ori and the Blind Forest.
Yeah.
That might work on xCloud. And yes, the colors aren't as good as compressed, but there's something there that when you boot your TV up now and, you have your whatever X device from Microsoft that's cheaper, it could be interesting to see where that goes, which isn't about the 8-core and the Navi. And it is. It's in their servers. But it's exciting. Like anything, the specs always sound good, man. But seriously, don't get your hopes up. Stuff will look awesome, but that's why I take it back to something simpler. I feel like it's probably close to a 1080 with this new ray tracing stuff and with the SSD benefits, and then you've got an 8-core. That sounds pretty solid. I mean, even years from now, that's going to look pretty darn nice, optimized.
The biggest thing for me is the processor, because when we talked to, I remember there was a lot of developer discussions from Destiny talking about how they have plenty of GPU left underneath the hood, but the issue comes to the processor, where it just they can't push those frame rates up because there's too many things that they're calculating that are not graphics related. They're physics related. And their game
For console.
Yeah, for console. They're game and physics related, not graphics related. And that's why they can't push those numbers up, because you're going to have significant spikes that drop it down to where it's like, oh, suddenly it's 30 FPS instead of being 60. And that's just not a good gaming experience. And what makes me excited is that they're finally, it sounds like they're adopting like a modern current CPU that they can get behind and not have those issues.
But it's still up to the developers to target the frame rate they want. Like, do you want your game to look great in screenshots, or do you want it to look great in motion?
I know that's what I want.
Yeah.
I want to hear them say, and I wish Cerny would have said it, is we're pushing and working with developers to make 60 frames per second a priority.
That'd be nice.
I just wanted to hear it, that it's on his mind, because it actually really impressed me that the SSD stuff came out. That was the only thing that surprised me, was the SSD is it doesn't surprise me that's coming. It surprised me it's a focus, to the point they're working supposedly on more specialized SSD, because I never really thought about, now they can render stuff, but they can't load it fast enough, which is ironic and funny. It drew me back to the great cartridge versus CD wars of the 90s. And we're going back to, and we've been suffering from it. That's why we install games on a hard drive, which is too slow. And so it goes back to instant access on a cartridge, which Nintendo once stood by and said, look, that's why when you jump through a painting in Mario, comparatively to what happened on the PlayStation, it was an incredible experience. And so I love that that's a focus for Sony. I wish frame rate was a part of that discussion. So hopefully they bring that up next time.